In 1918, a machinist in Erie, Pennsylvania, bolted a gray iron vise to his bench. That vise is still clamped to a bench somewhere in America today, still holding steel, still dead tight. Number 4 on this list was so overbuilt, the company nearly went broke making it. And number 1 was hand-fitted by men who signed their work in chalk. 15 forgotten bench vices built by foundries that no longer exist, that outlived every man who ever bought one. Let's count down from number 15. Number 15, the Fulton number 3. Fulton was Sears Roebuck's own hardware name, stamped onto tools the catalog sold to farmers who lived 100 miles from the nearest machine shop. The number 3 bench vise showed up in the catalog around 1915 for roughly $3.40, which was about a day and a half of wages for a man working a section gang. It was the cheap vise. That is the whole point of putting it here. Sears never poured its own iron. The Fulton castings came out of jobbing foundries in Ohio and Pennsylvania, the same floors that poured the name brand vices, and the sand and the scrap and the pouring temperature did not know which label was going on the box. So the farmer who ordered the budget vise out of a mail order catalog got gray iron with a fine, dense grain, a hand-cut Acme screw, and a body thick enough that you could stand on the jaw. You can still find them. Barn sales, estate auctions, the back of a garage in Nebraska where a grandson does not know what he is looking at. The paint is gone. The jaw serrations are worn smooth into shallow ripples, polished by 90 years of pipe and plow bolts. Tighten the handle and the screw still pulls the movable jaw straight and true with no shudder, no slop. That is the uncomfortable truth this list keeps circling back to. The worst American vise of 1915 is better than most of what is hanging on a big box pegboard right now. Fulton was the floor, and the floor was iron. Number 14, the Yoast number 204. Meadville, Pennsylvania is a small town in the northwest corner of the state, and for most of the 20th century, it made 2 things the rest of the country needed: zippers and vices. The Yoast Manufacturing Company started in the 1880s, and by the 1920s, a Yoast number 204 was a 4-inch machinist's vise that hardware jobbers sold for around $9. What made it last was a detail almost nobody notices. Yoast ran a long, wide slide bar under the jaws and machined the sliding surfaces on a planer rather than leaving them rough from the sand. That long bearing surface spread the load. When you crank down on a piece of hot rod stock and lean on the handle with everything you have, a short slide bar tries to twist. A long one just takes it, mile after mile, decade after decade. Yoast also sank real replaceable jaw faces into the castings and held them with machine screws instead of rivets, which means a vise from 1923 can still be given fresh teeth today for the price of lunch. That was a company betting that its product would be worth repairing in 40 years. Not many companies make that bet. The Meadville plant is gone in the form the old-timers knew. The name survives, licensed and moved and made elsewhere, and the modern tools carrying it are a different animal entirely. But the 204s poured before the Depression are still out there, still square, still holding. Ask any old machinist what happened to his first vise, and half the time the answer is the same. Nothing happened to it. It is still on the bench. Number 13, the Littletown number 45. Littletown, Pennsylvania, 30 miles from Gettysburg, is where the Littletown Hardware and Foundry Company poured vices under the LFD mark from the 1910s onward. The number 45 was a 4.5-inch swivel-based bench vise, and it went out the door in the 1920s for about $11, which was serious money for a home shop. The reason it survived is the reason a lot of Pennsylvania iron survived. Littletown poured thick. The body walls on a number 45 are heavy enough that the vise weighs nearly 40 pounds, in a size that a modern manufacturer would ship at 22. All that extra iron is not there to make the vise strong. It is there to make the vise stiff, and stiffness is what keeps a jaw from flexing open a few thousandths under load, which is what wears a vise out in the end. A stiff vise never limbers up, it just holds. Littletown also made a swivel base that actually worked. with two lock bolts pulling a wide flange down onto a machined ring instead of one bolt fighting a rough casting. Old-timers will tell you a swivel base is the first thing to go loose on a cheap vise. On an LFD, it is often the last. The company shifted to other castings, and by the time American hardware buyers were choosing on price alone, the number 45 was simply too expensive to make. Nobody killed it. It just quietly stopped being worth the sand it took to pour, which is the second uncomfortable truth of this list. Number 12, the Morgan chain vise. First pattern break. This one is not even a bench vise the way you are picturing it. The Morgan chain vise looks like a mistake. A shallow iron trough with a serrated V-block in the bottom, a length of roller chain, and a screw with a hook on it. That is the entire tool. It has no jaws. It cost about $7 in the 1920s, and plumbers bought them by the thousand. Here's what it does. You lay pipe in the V, drop the chain over the top, hook it, and crank. The chain wraps and bites, and the harder you thread against it, the tighter the chain pulls. A conventional jaw vise squeezes a pipe from two sides and crushes it into an oval. A chain vise grips it from every direction at once and does not deform it at all. On thin wall conduit, that difference is the difference between a job and a scrap pile. And here is why it lasts 100 years. There is nothing in it to wear out. No fitted slide, no long screw threading through a nut, no swivel. Every part that wears is a chain link, and chain links are the most replaceable object in the industrial world. A Morgan from 1919 with a new chain from a hardware store is a brand new vise. That is a design philosophy nobody practices anymore. Not durable because it is overbuilt, durable because the wear is concentrated into one dumb, cheap, replaceable part. The Morgan quietly outlasted the companies that made fancier things because there was nothing in it worth breaking. Number 11, the Holland's number 5, Erie Tool Works. Erie, Pennsylvania had iron in the ground, coal on the lake boats, and men who knew what to do with both. Erie Tool Works poured vices under the Holland's name, and the number 5 was a 5-inch machinist's vise that a jobber's catalog listed at around $14 in the mid-1920s. The Holland's vices are famous among collectors for one specific thing, the screw. Most vise screws of the era were single-start Acme threads cut on a lathe, fine for the job. Holland's cut theirs deep and generous, with a broad, flat crest that gave enormous bearing area against the nut. The result is a vise that, after a century of use, still has almost no backlash. You turn the handle a quarter turn, and the jaw moves a quarter turn's worth. No dead spot, no clunk. They also harden the jaw inserts properly. Not case hardened a few thousandths deep and called done, but heat treated so the serrations still bite into cold rolled steel today, after 100 years of being closed on things harder than they were. Erie Tool Works did not survive the century. The plant went the way of the rest of the American vice trade, folded and sold and shuttered as imports arrived at half the price and 1/3 the weight. But if you walk into a working blacksmith shop in western Pennsylvania right now, there's a fair chance there is a Holland's on the bench with the paint worn through to bare iron and a smith who would sooner sell his truck. Number 10, the Apprentice Bulldog number 55. The Apprentice Vice Company of New York sold the Bulldog with an advertisement that showed a vise clamping a locomotive spring, and the name was not marketing, it was a promise. A number 55 ran roughly $16 in the 1920s, and railroads bought them because a railroad does not get to send a tool back. The Bulldog's trick was the front jaw casting, which Prentice ran down and around into a deep, boxed section, instead of the thin fin most makers used. Load a normal vise, and the top of the front jaw wants to tip forward, opening a gap at the bottom of the work. The Bulldog's boxed jaw simply refuses. Clamp a piece of 1/4-inch flat bar low in the jaws of a Prentice and it will not tilt. Railroad shops beat these things without mercy. Men hammered on work held in them which every manual says never to do, and the Bulldogs took it because Prentice poured them from iron with enough carbon to absorb shock instead of shattering. There are Prentice vices today with hammer scars across the anvil pad, 1/8 of an inch deep, and not one crack radiating out of them. The company was eventually folded into a larger conglomerate, and the Bulldog name got attached to lighter, cheaper castings, and then to nothing at all. But the originals still sit in short-line railroad shops from Pennsylvania to Montana, not because anyone reveres them, because nobody has ever found a reason to replace one. Number 9, the Chaz. Parker number 974. Second pattern break. Here is where the story stops being about tools. Charles Parker of Meriden, Connecticut, built an empire on coffee mills, clamps, and famously on shotguns. And somewhere in the middle of it, he built some of the finest vices ever poured in North America. The number 974 was a 4-inch swivel-based machinist's vise, and by the 1930s it sold for around $18, which was outrageous. It was worth it. Parker fitted the sliding jaw to the body with hand scraping, the same technique used on machine toolways, which meant the bearing surfaces carried oil and did not gall. Parker also cross-drilled the screw and pinned the collar rather than relying on a threaded retainer that could back out. Small things, all of them expensive. And here is the part that stings. In the 1950s, Parker's own engineers ran the numbers and found that a vise this good was a business problem. A tool that never wears out is a tool you sell to a shop exactly once. The whole American vise industry had built itself on castings that outlived the customer relationship, and once foreign iron arrived at $8 a unit, there was no way to explain to a purchasing agent why he should pay double for something his grandchildren would inherit. So the good ones died first, not because they failed, because they succeeded so completely that they eliminated their own market. Parker got out, the 974 stayed. There are more working Parker vises in America today than there are American vice foundries. Number 8, the Athol, number 624. Athol, Massachusetts, sitting on the Millers River, was a machine tool town before anybody used that phrase. The Athol Machine Company poured vices there from the 1880s, and in 1905 a number 624 6-inch machinist's vise ran about $12, roughly 2 weeks of a mill hand's pay. The 624 is on this list for the base. Most makers of the period bolted the vise body to a swivel plate and called it finished. Athol machined a full circular tongue on the underside of the body that dropped into a matching machined groove in the base. So the vise did not just sit on its base, it interlocked with it. Swivel it, lock it, and the whole assembly behaves like one solid casting. That is why 100-year-old Athols do not have the wobble that plagues every other survivor from the era. Then in 1958 came the sentence that ends this entry. The L.S. Starrett Company, 4 miles up the road, bought a Athol machine outright and folded the vise line into the most precision-obsessed name in American tooling. Starrett kept building them for decades under its own name, and the pattern lineage from those 1880s Athol castings ran forward through most of the 20th century. Which means if you have a Starrett vise on your bench, you are using a design that a man in Massachusetts drew before the Wright brothers flew. Nobody improved it. Nobody needed to. They just kept pouring it until the economics finally caught up. Number 7, the Reed number 204. Reed Manufacturing, Erie, Pennsylvania, founded in 1896 and still in business today, which on this list makes it a ghost story with a happy ending. The number 204 was a 4-inch machinist's vise sold around 1925 for approximately $11. Reed's obsession was the inut. Every screw vise on earth eventually dies the same death. The bronze or iron nut wears, the screw develops slop, and the jaw starts to nod. Reed cast their nuts oversized in a high-tin bronze that was more expensive than what the competition used, and mounted them so the nut could be knocked out and replaced by any man with a drift punch in 10 minutes. Then they sold the replacement nuts for pennies for decades. Think about that business decision. Reed sold you a vise and then sold you a $2 part that made it new again, forever, instead of selling you another $11 vise. That should have destroyed them. Instead, it made every plumber and pipe fitter in the eastern United States a Reed customer for life. And Reed is the reason the word for a pipe wrench in half the shops in America was once just a Reed. The old 204s are all over the used market and they are almost never worn out. Wear is not what kills them. What kills them is being dropped off a bench onto concrete, and even then, the failure is a cracked base while the screw and jaws are still perfect. Erie iron, it gave up nothing. Number 6, the Columbian number 604 D45. Columbian Hardware of Cleveland, Ohio was the biggest name in American vices, and the D45 is the vice most Americans over 60 picture when you say the word. A 4.5-inch swivel base machinist's vise sold through hardware stores across the country from the 1920s onward for about $13. Columbian's genius was not any single feature, it was consistency. They poured hundreds of thousands of these things, and the metallurgy on a D45 from 1926 is essentially identical to a D45 from 1946, because Columbian ran their own foundry, controlled their own scrap, and tested their own iron. That kind of process discipline was rare, and it is the entire reason there is no such thing as a bad year for a Columbian. The other thing they got right was the anvil. Every Columbian has a generous flat pad cast behind the fixed jaw, and unlike the token bumps on most modern vices, the Columbian anvil is thick, backed by a column of iron running straight down into the base and directly over the mounting bolts. You can actually hammer on it. Generations of American men straightened bent bicycle forks and peened rivets on a Columbian anvil pad, and the pad simply does not care. Columbian was absorbed, moved, licensed, and eventually the name went to imported castings that look similar and are not. The originals give themselves away by weight. Pick up a real Cleveland D45 and a modern equivalent in the same jaw size, and the difference is 12 pounds of missing iron. Number 5, the blacksmith's leg vise. Third pattern break. This one is older than the country's electrical grid. The leg vise, or post vise, is the strangest looking tool on this list and the oldest design on it by 200 years. Two long wrought iron jaws hinged low, one of them extending all the way to the floor as a leg, a screw and a box nut up top, and a spring holding it open. Peter Wright of England shipped them to America by the ton. Columbian poured them under the Indian chief name. In 1910, a good 60-pound leg vise cost around $8. Here is the thing nobody understands about it until they use one. The leg vise is the only vise ever built that is designed to be hit. That leg carries hammer shock straight down into the floor instead of into the screw, which is why a blacksmith can lay a piece of glowing bar in the jaws and beat on it with a 4-pound hammer all afternoon, and the vise does not flinch. Try that with any machinist vise on this list and you will eventually crack a casting. And the jaws are wrought iron, not cast. Wrought, which means it was hammered from a bloom and has a grain like wood running the length of the jaw. Wrought iron does not fatigue the way modern steel does. It corrodes into a stable skin and stops. There are leg vices in working shops in America right now that were forged before the Civil War, and they are not antiques on a wall. They are in use today. Nobody makes them anymore in any real quantity because forging wrought iron jaws by hand cannot compete with pouring a casting. So the survivors just circulate. A smith dies, the vise moves to another shop, and it starts another 80 years. Number 4, the Wilton baby bullet. Wilton Tool of Chicago introduced the bullet vise in 1941, and the baby bullet, the 2.5 or 3-inch version, is the one that turned into a legend. It sold for about $18 after the war for a vise small enough to sit in your hand at a time when you could buy a 6-inch competitor for less. The design came from a simple, radical idea: make the body a tube. Every other vise on this list is an open channel casting with a slide riding in it, which means the load tries to spread the channel. The bullet enclosed the entire mechanism inside a cylindrical body, so the screw and slide were completely sealed against chips, grit, and swarf. The most common way a vise dies is abrasive junk getting into the slide and grinding it into slop. Wilton simply closed the door. Then they went further than any sane accountant would allow. The bullet body was a heavy casting, machined inside and out with a 360-degree swivel base, and the whole thing was finished to a standard closer to an instrument than a hand tool. The story that follows Wilton through the 1940s is a company that repeatedly priced itself into trouble because the men running it would not authorize a cheaper version. Today, an original Chicago-built baby bullet in decent shape sells for more than it cost new, adjusted or not to collectors, to machinists who buy them to use. That is the only endorsement that means anything. Number 3, the Wilton 4.5-inch bullet. The full-size bullet is the vice that American machinists argue about at 3 in the morning, and it is the only tool on this list young enough that people can still remember buying one new. The 4.5 carries everything the baby had, scaled up until it becomes almost absurd, 50+ pounds, an enclosed tubular body with a ground slide, a swivel base with a lock so positive that the vice will move the bench before it moves on the base, and that unmistakable silhouette, the rounded body that got it the name, which was not styling. The round section is the stiffest shape you can pour for a given weight of iron, which means Wilton's engineers put the metal exactly where the stress was and nowhere else. Ask a machinist why the old Chicago bullets are worth what they are worth, and he will not talk about the design. He will talk about how it feels. There is no rattle. Crank the handle and it goes home with a smoothness that people describe using words normally reserved for firearms and old cars. That feel comes from tolerances that cost money in 1948 and would be unthinkable now. Wilton was sold and sold again and moved, and the bullet came back as a reissue that is a genuinely good tool and is still not the same. The Chicago originals are the ones people hunt. And here is the number that ends the argument. A bullet made in 1948 that has been on a working bench for 78 years will typically still measure square within a couple of thousandths across the jaws. Nothing else on any pegboard in America can say that. Number 2, the Emmert turtleback, 4th pattern break. The last 2 entries are from the same small Pennsylvania town, and there is a reason. Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, the Emmert Manufacturing Company. The turtleback was their machinist's vice, and it earned the name from the domed, ribbed casting on the back of the body that looks exactly like a shell. A big one ran $22 in the 1920s, which was a week's wages for a skilled man. Emmert did not design like anybody else. The turtleback's dome is not decoration. It is a stressed shell ribbed on the inside that carries the load around the body the way an arch carries a bridge, so the vise is enormously rigid without being enormously heavy. That is aerospace thinking in gray iron before airplanes were made of metal. The jaws could be tilted, the base could be swiveled. The whole thing had more articulation than a vise had any business having, and every joint was fitted so precisely that adding all that movement subtracted nothing from the rigidity. Machinists who have used one describe the sensation of a tool that anticipates what you need, which is a strange thing to say about 40 pounds of iron. Emmert never made them fast, and never made them cheap, and never made very many, which is why a turtleback today is a thing people drive across 3 states to buy. It is also why the company never grew into a Columbian or a Wilton. They were too busy building it right to build it big. Number 1, the Emmert K1 Iron Monster. And finally, in first place, the Emmert K1 Pattern Maker's Vice, known in every wood shop that has ever had one as the Iron Monster, patented in the 1890s, Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, roughly 75 pounds, and in the 1920s, $35, which was the price of a decent used car's worth of a working man's month. Understand what this thing does. The jaws open wide. They tilt to 90 degrees. The entire vise rotates in its mount so the work can be spun to any angle and locked. The jaws tilt independently so they can grip a tapered piece and hold it dead flat. and a dog rises out of the front jaw so the whole vise becomes a clamp against the bench top. One tool doing what a modern shop needs 4 fixtures and a rotary table to accomplish. Pattern makers were the aristocracy of the American shop floor. They carved the wooden masters that every casting in the country was made from, working to tolerances that had to account for how iron shrinks as it cools. They could not tolerate a tool that flexed a thousandth. So Emmert built to their standard, hand-fitting every K1, scraping the ways, and the men in the Waynesboro shop chalked their marks onto the castings as they went. The economics were always impossible. A K1 took hours of skilled handwork in an era when the whole industry was racing toward the opposite. Emmert built them anyway, decade after decade, and when pattern making itself died and computers started carving the masters, the reason for the K1 evaporated. The company stopped. The name got licensed. Nothing since has come close. But here is the ending. Go on the used market right now, and a genuine Waynesboro K1 sells for well over $1,000, sometimes several. They are bought by woodworkers who put them on benches and use them every single day. 130 years after the patent, the Iron Monster is not a relic. It is still measurably the best vise anyone has ever built. Nobody has replaced it. Nobody has even tried. 15 vices, 15 foundries, and almost all of them are gone. Not because the tools failed, but because they didn't. America built vices so good, they destroyed the market for vices and then bought cheaper ones from somewhere else. Go look at your bench. If there's a name cast into that iron, Columbian, Reed, Athol, Wilton, tell me in the comments. I want to know how many of these are still working.